and welcome to Unhacked. My name is Brian Graff. I'm Senior Vice President of Business Development here at Abacode. We're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern to take you through a cyber topic of the week. We'll cover the what, the where, the when, the who, and the why of the most recent hacks and security events, and provide you with information on how you can learn from the attack to prevent it from happening to you. So today we're going to talk about the most recent Blackbaud hack and ransomware attack that occurred earlier in this year. So Blackbaud is a fundraising service provider platform organization, one of the largest in the world. And in May 2020, they noticed that an attack was occurring in their data center, in their corporate infrastructure part of their organization. Now, an employee noticed that an unusual login had happened in a corporate and data center server, and began an investigation that determined that they had been hacked as early as February of 2020, and that the hackers had downloaded some end-user customer information and performed some sort of ransomware attack to shut down some systems. Over 100 organizations as of now have reported as affected by the Blackbaud attack, and probably more will report it later on. And a few things about this hack are interesting and confusing to go over. So I wanted to go over them with you so that if you're ever involved in a hack or a ransomware attack, and it's from a customer or from a vendor or a partner, some other organization that still affects you, you will be able to read through the information and determine, what's security relevant information and what is just PR fluff, and determine how this is going to affect you. So as I said, Blackbaud, and a Blackbaud employee noticed that there was unusual activity and unusual logon on a server, and performed an investigation. And per the nonprofit news, who spoke to a Blackbaud spokesperson under the condition of anonymity, that they were able to identify the exploit used by the attackers and patch it, and they were able to remove all malware from their systems, and that a ransom was paid after confirmation that the data was destroyed from the hackers. So first, a few things. That the spokesperson said that the access looked like legitimate customer access, which is why it wasn't flagged by monitoring or IDS initially. That's a weird red flag that I would have pressed more if I was a nonprofit Times to get more information out of them. And the second was the part that that Blackbaud, in their official press release, said that they had received confirmation that the data had been destroyed from the hackers and they paid a ransom. I'm going to guess that was kind of a miscommunication in reporting on their PR team, but we'll go farther into that as well. So we don't really know a lot about what happened here. We don't know who was responsible. We don't know what exploit they used or what malware they used. An organization isn't bound to give the public those details. It's good that they do, because the more information the public has about attacks that are out there, the more easily that we can prepare for them. But we don't have any of that information here. But just from what Blackbaud has provided, we can discern a couple things. We can determine what they did right and what they did wrong. So Blackbaud noted that a corporate data center server was accessed, and some nonprofit end user information, PII, was accessed. It most likely a current or former charitable donor list. So you'll have names, address, and PII. So not good stuff to have exfiltrated. However, they said that their cloud-based system, where all their production fundraising occurs, was not affected. So the first thing they did that was right is that they partitioned and segmented their networks from corporate to production, which is something every organization should do, but especially ones that run some sort of application that takes in customer data. And the reason why you do that is just because of an event like this. So even if a hacker gets into your corporate environment, gets into your back office, that doesn't necessarily mean they get to the production environment. There's another step they have to take. They have to defeat that firewall. And hopefully, it's a different set of credentials so that they don't have free reign anywhere if they get into your network. So that was the first good thing that they did. Monitoring, they did say that they had monitoring and IDS in place, even though it didn't detect the initial attack, it did eventually flag that someone was logging into a corporate server and it was unusual activity. And there was somebody either looking at the logs or receiving alerts that somebody logged into the server and they probably shouldn't have been, which triggered the initial investigation. And had that not happened, this attack would probably be a lot worse. So here's the things that we think they did wrong. Again, this is speculation because we only have a part of the story. But if this is the full story and all of this is accurate, we can tell a couple things that they didn't do right. So one thing I said that was very odd about the reporting here was that the Blackbaud spokesperson said that the activity looked like regular customer activity, which is very odd because if I'm a customer, I should be logging into a production environment, into a cloud environment. I shouldn't be logging into a corporate environment. And if I am able to log into a corporate environment or an on-prem environment, I should not be able to access other customer data. So think about when you log into a banking application and you do your banking or pay your bills. Even if someone steals your account information and can get into your account, that doesn't mean they can get into other banking customers' accounts. So it's odd that a hacker that was using customer credentials was able to access other customer data. So either the hacker had additional access, or the spokesperson misspoke, or there's some issues there in Blackbaud in terms of the customer instances of their applications, because it doesn't matter if you hack into a system with customer credentials, you should not be able to get to another customer's data. So the secure coding, scanning your application for penetration, for vulnerabilities and penetration exploits will help prevent that. The Blackbaud spokesperson did say that they had IDS and monitoring, but I'm wondering if they had a true SIM in place. A SIM should be able to detect unusual activity both on the corporate and production side, and should definitely warn you prior to 3 months after the fact that there's unusual activity going on. Now that depends on the type of system you run, but you should be able to implement a SIM and provide it with some sort of rule set, and it should also gather and correlate logs so that it can determine what regular activity is on your network. So you tell it that, traditionally personnel should only be accessing my application through United States IP addresses. Typically, my customers are 8 to 5, 8 to 6. That's not always the case. Some web applications are used worldwide at all times, so you're not always able to put those types of restrictions on your SIM and have it flag when there's unusual activity. But no matter what, your SIM should be able to establish a baseline of standard network activity and user activity and flag you when it detects something that's out of the ordinary for that baseline. So I'm wondering if they had a SIM in place, and if they did, was it configured correctly, and was it being monitored correctly? Just because you have a SIM in place, it's logging everything and it's correlating all the logs just like it's supposed to, and it's sending out the alerts. If there's no one there that determines this is a real alert, this is a false alert, we need to triage this right now, if there's not a human element on the back end actually performing remediation and escalating the event so that the attack is actually mitigated, then your SIM is just sending alerts to nobody. Customer security responsibility is something that Blackbaud may have dropped the ball on, depending on whether this customer access that they reported on, whether it was a legitimate customer account that got hacked, or if it was a spoofed email or a spoofed account that a hacker was able to masquerade as. So if a Blackbaud customer was hacked and that hacker was able to get the Blackbaud credentials by having an agent on that customer network and basically spying on those employees until they went into Blackbaud and started to access that information and grab those credentials, then yes, Blackbaud wouldn't know that wasn't a valid or a normal employee accessing the accounts. So in that case, there's really nothing that Blackbaud can do from a technology perspective other than maybe some advanced again, against some activity, unusual activity monitoring. But if a normal customer has credentials and they get stolen, you're not going to know that it's not that customer because they have the right credentials. So in that case, the only way to protect yourself is to ensure the customers are aware of their responsibilities. So is Blackbaud telling their customers, if you suspect that your credentials have been compromised, if you have a breach in your own network, you have to let us know. You have to train your employees about security awareness. You have to train them about phishing, because if your customers get phished and those credentials get stolen, that's the same as Blackbaud's credentials getting stolen, because now that hacker can get in, download anything they have access to, and that's still Blackbaud's data being exfiltrated. Once they do the assessment and the incident response investigation, they'll be able to say, okay, well, these were legitimate controls, legitimate credentials stolen by someone else. That absolves them of that responsibility. However, the hack still occurred, and if they didn't tell the customers, you need to be aware of this, and this is your responsibility, it's harder in court to hold them accountable to it. So how do you prevent something like this from happening to you? Well, we don't know exactly what vulnerability was used to create this attack, but they did say that Blackbaud did say that they ran scans and were able to detect the vulnerability and mitigate it. So that tells me that some sort of scan was run, they found a vulnerability, and were able to patch it. So you're not going to be able to do that if you don't run routine scans. So you need to run vulnerability scans at least every quarter, but usually now most organizations that store sensitive data are doing it monthly. And that gives you the ability every month to determine whether you have current vulnerabilities that need to be patched, or if the previous vulnerabilities have been patched as according to your service level agreement. So you need to be running those scans monthly and patching according to a defined schedule. So a common schedule is critical needs to be done immediately. High vulnerabilities need to be patched within 30 days, medium within 90, and low within 180 days. So if you're not scanning every month, how do you know that the vulnerabilities from the last month were patched according to schedule? You also need to run scans whenever you make a major change, either to your system or to your application. So we aren't sure whether Blackbaud was doing that. But that would have helped to prevent that vulnerability from being there in the first place for a hacker to exploit. Making sure you have an industry-leading SIM and 24-hour security monitoring by a team of professionals, excuse me, that manage that SIM and monitor it on a 24-hour basis. Just having a SIM isn't enough. A SIM is its own discipline. So if you don't have employees on your team that have done nothing but manage SIMs for their career, and they're just doing it as an auxiliary task, you're really running the risk of having a SIM misconfigured, and you're not going to know it until something like this happens. Just like physical security, if you have a bank and you have a bank vault that needs to be protected, you don't just hand out you don't just hand out weapons to your tellers and say, hey, watch the perimeter and make sure nobody gets in here. You hire professionals that guard your bank vault. You need to hire professionals to guard your data, which is your digital vault, so to speak. Secure coding. So I talked earlier about how if that spokesperson was correct, that a hacker was able to pose as a customer and gather other customer data, something went wrong in the coding for that application. So during initial coding for an application, and then for every release that happens thereafter, there has to be secure practices built into your application development. So are you testing the code for security flaws? Are you scanning the code using a static code analyzer to make sure there aren't any flaws there? Are you performing vulnerability scans of your entire system after you implement a major change to ensure that if you installed something that opened up a hole somewhere else in your network, that you're able to see it before the hackers do? All these security controls have to be implemented as a component of your coding practice. Otherwise, every time you change something, whether in your application, you stand up a new server, you add a new external connection via API to an external service, those are all potential vulnerabilities. And the only way you're going to know that there's a hole there is if you go poke for holes, which is what vulnerability scanning is. And again, making sure a SIM is there is really the only way that you'll know that an attack is occurring. Scanning is really the only way you're going to determine whether there's a hole in your wall, and a SIM's the only way you can determine that there's somebody currently crawling through it. And without those two security mechanisms, you're blind to your vulnerabilities and you're blind to actual attacks that are occurring. So that's all we have today. If you found this information useful, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next Thursday on Unhacked.